Oh my gosh.
Today.
Jason, I'll compare that email that you sent, the article, I'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
It was a draft, beautiful draft.
I love this.
It took me a long time to do that.
There was a lot of clothes.
Just not gonna show you, maybe not a coverage.
Yeah, the weather is strange.
Yeah.
It's still the 80s is pretty
Good.
good. The water here.
I'm just gonna go get Star Wars.
Okay, good.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Hi, how are you?
How was your New Year's?
It's good. I know you want to.
Thank you, yeah, that's safe to be here.
Really rough. Usually, I don't know what it was. I think everyone's got too comfortable playing around with big electronics.
I had two at home, so they were like, they didn't want to go. They were like, no.
It's great because your family goes until Thursday. So like, you stay out.
I know, right?
That's what I was confused. I didn't get it. I didn't realize. Didn't want to go out.
Hello. Happy New Year.
All the same.
Oh, it'll go. Once you-
You can go on.
All right, I will call this meeting to order. It's 7 o'clock. This meeting is being held in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act and is open to the public and media. Notices were duly posted and the meeting was advertised in the Huntington County Democrat and Courier News. Formal action may be taken. We do the flag salute. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So just for the members of the public here tonight, this is a reorganization meeting, so tonight we are going to go over the election results, give the oath of office to our new board members, our returning board members, based on the election results, as well as vote on a president and vice president. So reorganization, the election results are duly noted in the board agenda. Congratulations to Mrs. Ryan, Mrs. Menser, and Mrs. Pogorski. Now for the oath of office. If I could have Mrs. Pogorski, Mrs. Menser, and Mrs. Ryan stand, please. And raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same and to the governments established in the United States and this state under the authority of the people. I state your name. Do solemnly swear that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education, and that I am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to statute, nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in statute, and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability. Congratulations. Welcome aboard. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
So the next part of our meeting is to do roll call. Mrs. Betterman?
Here.
Dr. Cerciello?
Here.
Mrs. Fiore?
Here.
Mrs. Sample?
Here.
Mrs. Menzer?
Here.
Mr. Peach?
Here.
Mrs. Bogorski?
Here.
Mrs. Ryan?
Here.
Mrs. Wolf?
Here.
We will now do election of a president. So each year at this time, we have to elect a president and vice president. So during, and according to our bylaws, anyone can be nominated. There's no second required. So do I have any nominations for president?
I would like to nominate Carol Hample for president. And she did a fantastic job, and I'd love her to do that again if she's willing. Thank you.
Do I have any other nominations? Okay, I will close nominations and do roll call for Mrs. Hample. Mrs. Betterman?
Yes.
Dr. Cerciello?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiore?
Yes.
Mrs. Hample?
Yes.
Mrs. Menzer?
Yes.
Mr. Peach?
Yes.
Mrs. Bogorski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ryan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wolf?
Yes.
Congratulations, Carol.
Thank you.
So I will now turn the meeting over to the newly elected board president.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. All right, we are now moving on to the election of the vice president. Same thing, any nominations do not need to be seconded, and then it will be voted on. So do I have a nomination for vice president?
I move, go ahead. I move to nominate Randall Peach for vice president.
And I nominate Dr. Cerciello.
Thank you, thank you. Are there any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed, so we will go through, we will do a roll call for Randy first, and then we will go and do a roll call through for Camille. And you're doing the roll call, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So roll call for Mr. Peach. Mrs. Betterman?
No.
Dr. Cerciello?
No.
Mrs. Fiore?
No.
Mrs. Sample?
No?
Mrs. Menzer?
No.
Mr. Peach?
Yes.
Mrs. Bogorski?
No.
Mrs. Ryan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wolf?
Yes.
Now we'll do roll call for Dr. Cerciello. Mrs. Betterman?
Yes.
Dr. Cerciello?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiore?
Yes.
Mrs. Sample?
Yes?
Mrs. Menzer?
Yes.
Mr. Peach?
No.
Mrs. Bogorski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ryan?
No.
Mrs. Wolf?
No.
Dr. Cerciello has one vote.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Can we applaud?
All right, moving on to reorganization. Can I get a motion to adopt R1 through R5?
So move that.
Second, Carolyn.
Okay. Any questions on the action items or the action items? If there are? Reorg stuff?
Are we including the calendar?
I think it is in there, yeah.
R1.
There, R1.
No concern, just was February 21st, I think is the day after a holiday.
Yeah, they don't care about
They don't care.
that.
I just wasn't sure when we would undue burden on the administration to answer all our questions.
Okay. they'll just get swarmed by us Tuesday morning.
Yeah. Or Monday,
Or-
we're attached.
Any other questions, comments? All right, can I get a roll call, please?
Ms. Betterman,
Yes.
Dr. Cerciolo.
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Ms. Zample,
Yes.
Ms. Menso,
Yes.
Mr. Beach,
Yes.
Ms. Bogorski,
Yes.
Ms. Ryan,
Yes, but I abstain from part 3.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes.
Passes.
We have a superintendent's report.
Thank you. Welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. It's great to see you. Welcome, new board members and returning board member. Tonight is one of the few nights that I don't have to make a formal presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Cherry, our board attorney. Stacy is from the offices of Fogarty and Hara, and she is one of the partners that we work with. Generally in special ed matters, but we talk often. So Stacy's going to go over the Code of Ethics presentation. I don't know, was this uploaded in the,
It wasn't this afternoon.
it wasn't this afternoon. We'll make sure, you should have a copy in front of you of the presentation. We're gonna pull it up in just a moment. And Ms. Cherry has provided to be very entertaining tonight. No pressure.
I'm not so sure if I can pull that off for an ethics presentation, but I will do my best. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish it was a particularly exciting topic to be talking about. There are some really interesting pieces on certain topics, I would say, but overall, I wouldn't say that the role of the board member and the ethics that are required to be followed related to that are necessarily a thrilling topic to go through as a basis for things. But I will do my best. Do I push this to move forward?
I will.
You move, okay, so we can go forward. So I think it's important to talk about that, you know, being on a board of education is something that's unique. It's a creation essentially by statutes that allows for the governance of our schools. There are ethical limitations that are imposed as part of being a member of a board of education, and those are set forth in our school ethics codes, which I'm going to go through, but I have in the presentation for you so you can read them a little more at your leisure if you'd like, so that we can get to the kind of more interesting topics related to it. Oh, even better, perfect, thank you. So the role of the board. So the powers that you have are defined within 18A, which is the statutes that govern our education predominantly. And the things that we talk about for board members are that you're here to enforce the rules from the State Board of Education. You are to give deference to those rules and laws in order to run our schools. You can make, amend, and repeal rules for government and management of the schools and the employees, and you perform all acts consistent with the state board in a lawful and proper manner, so that the district is able to run itself in a way that's good for its students and its staff, really. The board has to do things like approve the curriculum consistent with the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, adopt the budget for the school to be able to run, hire the personnel that run the district, and develop policies for the management of the district. But none of those are done alone. They're all done based on the recommendation of the superintendent of the schools, which is the person that you are responsible for hiring directly in terms of overseeing the school. You also have specific responsibilities for certain actions within the district. So doing hearings for harassment, intimidation, and bullying is delegated to the board. Doing a hearing for long-term suspensions of students. If there's an appeal about whether a student is a resident in the district. Grievances for teachers as part of collective negotiations. Terminations for cause are hearings that are held before the board. Increment withholding for a teaching staff member. And non-renewals. So those personnel matters are all things that come directly to the board for the hearing. You only function when you're in session and you have a quorum, which for you would be
5.
counting as I sit in. Quick count. Yeah, so you have to have 5 in order to function. And you have to hold a public meeting at least once every month when school's in session. So you can sometimes skip the July or August, so most boards still meet at least once in the summer, some 2, some even 4. If you don't have quorum by 8 o'clock, which is the time you have to hold the meeting as scheduled by, then it can be recessed until 9 o'clock that night. If you still don't have quorum, then you have to adjourn and reconvene within 7 days. And you always have to comply with OPMA, which is the Open Public Meetings Act for anybody who doesn't know. Your responsibility is really to develop policy, develop plans, and evaluate outcomes, not manage the day-to-day operations. So they talk about not being responsible for administering the school, but seeing that they're well run. You can't exercise that administrative authority, and you delegate those things really to the superintendent and the business administrator. Superintendent administers the district, keeps the board informed about happening. Business administrator is really responsible for things like the budget and maintaining the fiscal responsibility of the district. We want the relationship between the board and the administration to be cooperative. So it's encouraged that you are sharing concerns in advance of meetings, letting the administration know if you have any concerns so those can be addressed, making sure that you're cognizant of which matters can be discussed in public and which matters have to be discussed in closed, and making sure that if you are confronted with a community complaint, that you direct that back to the administration to be dealt with, and only act at the public meeting after the administration has failed to offer a solution to address that issue. If there are community complaints, they're directed to, during the board meeting, they're directed to the board president to respond, who speaks on behalf of the board. But if you receive complaints because, oh, I ran into you at a party and you're a member of the board, and I want to tell you that this thing is happening, then that gets directed back to the superintendent, who will delegate it to the appropriate level of the administration within the schools to figure out what's going on and how to handle it. We talk about the code of ethics and how your job is part of, and I should say volunteer, because I know none of you are getting paid, even though it's a considerable time and effort that's put into being a board member. But yours is to support and protect the school personnel and proper performance of their duties. And I'll talk about some cases that raised ethical concerns for board members who didn't. When there's something that is undermining or opposing or compromising of the district's position, then that can be something that's a violation of the code of ethics for the board members. It doesn't mean that you can't disagree with something that has come up, that you can't express what your concern is. It doesn't mean that you have to ardently support everything and every item that comes up, but ultimately your job is to support and protect the school personnel and to ensure that the district is being well run. Criticizing, the superintendent could be a violation of the code of ethics if it compromises their ability to do their job. And I'll talk about a case as we get a little further on social media, which is one of those hot topics always, in terms of things like criticizing. Is that me? No? Okay. The division of responsibilities between the board and the superintendent. So as the board members, you establish the policies. The superintendent administers them, makes sure that they're being implemented. The superintendent advises the board, gives advice on whether policies should be adopted or amended or revised, and that is done in consultation with the board, and ultimately you then adopt them. And then the superintendent is responsible for implementing those school programs, making sure that it is compliant with the board's policies that are compliant with the New Jersey state requirements.
Stacy, I just want to interrupt and let board members know that the presentation is in the BOE portal. So if you don't have it, take a look. It's in there if you want to follow along on your computer digitally, whatever you prefer. My apologies.
That's okay. So, as a board, you work as a membership unit, not as individuals. So you ultimately share each of your opinions if they are divergent or the same in terms of actions that the board is going to take. But then the board takes final action that is as a unit. And so the board adopts what that course of action is, and then that moves forward. With the president being the person who speaks on the board's behalf and conveys that information unless it's requested by the president to ask somebody else to convey it on the board's behalf. When you have certain professional experience, that can be something certainly that you use as providing insight to the board. If you have a financial background, you could give insight into some ideas for the budget or how something might work. If you have an educational background, something like that. But that doesn't mean that the board will adopt that course of action or that they have to follow it. And it doesn't mean that there aren't other members of the board who may have equally valuable and important input that should be considered, even if they don't necessarily have the same background. All of your, or a significant number of your board guidance is contained within your board policies under the 0-100s section. So enticing. Okay. You don't individually get to exercise responsibility, and you don't have any direct supervisory authority yourself in the district. And in your board policies in that 0-100 number, it goes through a variety of important bylaws for the board in terms of those action. But you as an individual cannot command certain services of school district employees or ask them to do things. That all would have to go through the superintendent. And that's another area where board members can get themselves in trouble in terms of trying to delegate authority over staff members. You're expected to comport yourself professionally as a member of the board. You should be concerned with all issues affecting the district, even if you have a child in the district or a family member who's a staff member or something like that. You want to make sure that you are focusing on all of the children and all of the constituents within the district. You also want to make sure that as a board, you're working to operate effectively, that you're working as a team in order to better the district and its students and its staff. Some missteps we see are airing personal grievances in a public forum. So board members sometimes disagree about things. That's okay. It's certainly okay to disagree and share what your opinion is as compared to someone else, but keeping it professional and focused on what the topic of disagreement is without, negative comments about the person or things like that. Making sure we're not relying on rumors and innuendo, things we hear or see on Facebook moms or other things that may come up through various channels. And then things that are like grandstanding and, diminishing other members of your team in terms of what the public sees. We want to be, hopefully, as much as we can, a united team in terms of advancing the district, even where there's disagreement about particular items. You have items that are confidential that you're not permitted to share in the public. So personnel items, members, things about certain students are not things that can be shared. And the expectation is that you will keep those things confidential, even when they involve, for example, like if you have a child in the district and you find out something about their teacher of your child because of your role in the board, you can't then turn around and share that information because you're only privy to it as a board member. So the superintendent is your certified leader of the school district. They have certain tasks that they're directed to perform. They give the educational leadership to the district, things like the district goals, the policies, the budget recommendations that then come to you as the board. They make recommendations for all staff appointments. So you cannot say, I'd like to hire X person for the director of special services. The superintendent has to make a recommendation for somebody to be hired for the position, and then you can vote on approving that person or not. They're responsible for supervising and evaluating the administrators, central office staff, things like that, and making those evaluative performance recommendations about staff members. and then overseeing generally the school level operations. So these are some limits on your role in the code. One of the main limits are set forth all of the main limits, I would say, are really set forth in the Code of Ethics. It's the standards that you have to follow, and if you violate those Code of Ethics, there can be a complaint filed with the School Ethics Commission. The School Ethics Commission can make recommendations for reprimand, censure, suspension, or removal of a board member for violations of the Code of Ethics. That includes the School Ethics Act. They say that it's essential that the conduct of the members of the local board of education and school administration hold the respect and confidence of the people. I think doing the things we talked about in terms of having a disagreement that's respectful then garners that respect from the public, that we can be people that disagree and maybe disagree very strongly about certain things, but we do it in a respectful manner and then come to a consensus as a board, and we move forward in support of whatever that consensus was that the board decided on in terms of those items. You have to avoid conduct that violates the public trust or gives the impression to the public that their trust is being violated, and quite a few of the ethical codes relate to that you're not going to vote in a way that gives the appearance that you're giving a benefit to a relative and things like that. So we'll talk about those a little more. And then there are prohibited acts that apply to all the board members and to school administration for any of the prohibited acts also. So this is a list of the Code of Ethics. I'm not going to read them all to you because that would be boring. And you can certainly go through them. But it talks about the things we've been discussing, things like confining yourself to policy decisions, looking out for the educational welfare of students, recognizing that the authority is with the whole board, not with individual members of the board. It goes on, there are many of them. Referring complaints to the administration, voting on personnel. These are all the code requirements of what you'll do. What they're intended to do is keep focus on the educational welfare of students, remove the influence of politics and partisanship and focus on those kids, protect the schools from harm, and then give the educational professionals that you hired through the superintendent and then through the appointments that were recommended by the superintendent the ability to do their job, and keep the board from being the ones who are administering the schools, that you're overseeing them and making sure they're well run. So these are some of the things that are the limits. When it comes to those, there are what I would say are the interesting cases about what board members sometimes do to get themselves in trouble. So the Code of Ethics indicates that you have a certain role, the superintendent has a certain role, and when you overstep those roles and get outside of your domain, then you are performing the requirements that are the superintendent's instead of being advisory and evaluative. So some of the things that you have to give your oath to is carrying out your responsibility to administer the schools, making sure that to not administer the schools, making sure that they're well run, supporting, protecting school personnel, referring all complaints to the chief administrator, confining your acts to policy making. Those are all things that you are limited to in terms of your powers. And these are some things that could potentially violate the Code of Ethics. So taking action that's unrelated to your board member's duty, giving a direct job or responsibility or activity to a staff member that you want them to do, that you've asked them as a board member, I'd like you to go get me X so that I can evaluate. I want to see the resumes of all the applicants for the director of special services. And going to the secretary in the administrative office and asking for those would be a violation. Acting or attempting to resolve a complaint that somebody gets. So you get a complaint, you investigate it yourself, and then go to the administration and say, look, I got a complaint from so-and-so in the public. I looked into it. Here's what I found out. Now I want you to take action. Those would be things that would be a violation of your responsibility to the Code of Ethics. It limits your responsibility in terms of personnel actions, as much as personnel are an important consideration. You are responsible for appointing people following the superintendent's recommendation. You're not supposed to withhold your approval for arbitrary and capricious reasons. You are supposed to also limit your involvement in the hiring process, except for the hiring of the superintendent, to avoid the appearance of any impropriety in terms of that power that's delegated to you versus the power delegated to the superintendent. There are several advisory opinions related to what the board member's responsibility is and the limits of that related to the role designation between the superintendent and the board members. So one of those that often comes up is participating in interviews. The recommendation really is that you should not participate in interviewing staff members for positions, even the administrative positions, that would be outside of your policy, planning, decision-making role in terms of the district. But in terms of involvement, if there was going to be some, the advisory opinion, which isn't, if anybody doesn't know, you can ask for an advisory opinion regarding any matter that could be a violation of the code of ethics. They sometimes will issue a decision, they sometimes don't, but they're basically telling you this is where we think it would go based on the facts that you've presented to us. And so they asked what would be the role in terms of conducting interviews. And they said, look, if you're going to do it, we don't think it's the best practice, but if you're going to do it, we would limit it to 2 board members. It would only be upon the recommendation of the superintendent to have a committee that includes board members, and that you can't usurp the superintendent's recommendations in terms of hiring. But they said, careful when you're doing this, that generally the administration's job is to conduct the interviews and make that determination. And the board can't direct the superintendent to have a committee that includes board members on it. It has to be something that the superintendent has proposed. And you're supposed to offer kind of your observations and assessments, but not be like leading the interview process in terms of the involvement. In this one, a board member alleged that the board president violated the code of ethics because of their involvement in the interview process for a principal. The board president created extensive interview questions to be used, staffing packets, rating forms that were to guide how the interviews went for the principal, took the resumes home, of all the applicants to review on their own. And in this one, the superintendent actually testified that at every step of the process, the board president controlled the interview process, would only permit the superintendent to do things that the board president said, this is what you can do in terms of the interview process. So it was a clear overstep, but it shows when you have a board member who is well involved in the interviewing that can be a concern. And obviously they found that it was a violation of the code of ethics to be participating at that level, and it was administering the schools. This one, board member went with another board member to the board office without talking to the administration to review resumes for candidates for a position, which is something that you can do. You can review the resumes. The superintendent and the director of human resources were there. Secretary was there, gave them the resumes to review. Board member said, wait a minute, where are the rest of the resumes? I want to look at those too. And they were informed those are in a locked office. Those are not the ones that are being advanced. The board member said, I'm going to find a custodian, get the key from them, have them open the locker, give me the resumes. Luckily, an assistant superintendent intervened before the board member was able to get the resumes out of the locked closet, so they ultimately were not reviewed, which saved the board member, I would say. So the board member was found to have entered in her capacity as a board member in order to review the resumes. So her role was supposed to be limited to policy, planning, appraisal. They held that she violated the code of ethics because she went beyond mere appraisal of the resumes and reviewing them, something she could do, but took steps to locate and obtain additional resumes that weren't available. But ultimately, she didn't administer the schools because she got stopped before she was able to get the rest of the resumes. I think if she had gotten to them and reviewed those also, she would have also been in violation of administering the schools. In this one, the board president issued personally a rice notice to the business administrator without notification to the board on recommendation to the superintendent. So rice notice then resulted in the business administrator resigning. For anybody who doesn't know, you have to issue a rights notice 2 days before having a personnel discussion that could affect the rights of employment for a school member, so that it can be held in public if the member, the teacher, administrator, et cetera, asks. The action violated the code of ethics because compromised the board. Rights notice implied there was going to be action, but there was no authority to issue that rights notice. Only the board president or the majority of the full board can issue a rights notice to the superintendent. And the rights notice that would be issued to the business administrator would be done on a recommendation from the superintendent. So a single board member would not be able to issue a rights notice. This one involved a board member, well, 2 board members who were conducting their own investigation. They felt that the director of special service was double dipping. The director was working for the district while at the same time doing some work for another school district. The board member did their own investigation, brought their conclusions to the superintendent, demanded the superintendent issue a rights notice to the director, and then aired those accusations to the board in a closed session. The board then authorized the attorney for the board to conduct an investigation, concluded that yes, the director of special services worked in both districts, but there was no overlap of work. It had been disclosed, and then ultimately the board president and superintendent accused the 2 board members about their actions. And ultimately they determined that by conducting the investigation and making a determination about the guilt of the director of special services, the board members are overstepping their duties. It should have been directed to the superintendent. I have a concern, director of special services may be double dipping, working for our district while at the same time working for another district. And then the superintendent should have been able to conduct the investigation and determine if any action or complaint needed to be made regarding the director.
That's a quick question.
Yeah.
What's a rights notice?
Oh, so it's a letter that
Okay.
basically says, we're going to talk about you in closed session at the next board meeting. If you would like that to be held in public instead of in closed session, let us know. So personnel issues. In this one, there were allegations about the board members participating in interview process for principal position, so same position as the other one. The other members of the board didn't know that these 4 board members were participating in the interviews. They complained that it took away from the duties of the superintendent. Commission found that they were appointed to a selection committee by the board president, and there was nothing improper about their involvement. Having 4 of them was a bit of a concern because it's almost a quorum. And if you remember, the advisory opinion suggested you really should only have 2 if you're going to do it. Having them interview a candidate might be a concern, but being a member who's observing and maybe providing some guidance would probably be a little bit better. And you could see a board member interfering if they're participating in the interview process, because they could take away from the superintendent's ability to make a recommendation about who they think is the best candidate, especially if you have 4 board members who are participating in that process. But I think you can see kind of the balance between what the advisory opinion was, suggesting we really should only have 2, they shouldn't be conducting the interview, and what a court decision was, it was okay, it was a committee, the superintendent appointed it, they participated, but be wary because you're right on the edge of stepping over where you really should be. Volunteering. This has actually come up in quite a few advisory opinions. So board members often are people who volunteer in our schools, right? You're already volunteering a lot of your time to be a member of the board. You might be volunteering through being a class parent or the PTA or the book fair or a variety of things. And so there are a bunch of board advisory opinions about volunteering. There are a couple that say this is too far. There are a couple that say this is what you can do. So in this one, a board member asked for an opinion about volunteering in the theater with casting, rehearsals, lighting, and the commission said this would violate the act because this type of volunteering is directly engaged in a school-sponsored function. It's outside the limited scope of a board member's role. It would require the board member to give direct orders to school personnel and students and responsibilities that should be within the school personnel domain. In this particular one, it was a theater production, and the person was gonna be like heavily involved in kind of the casting, there was a staff member who oversees the theater, the board member was gonna be overseeing that staff member. So it wasn't like I just went in to paint the sets one day. It was a very involved role in the theater. This one, it was about being a leader of a school club that met on school grounds, which also was considered a violation. It went beyond the oversight and authority piece because of their involvement with students, and the amount of contact the board member would have with students and parents as a leader of the club, and it blurred the line between being, you know, a volunteer and day-to-day administrative tasks. And then this is one where it was permissible. So they asked if they could volunteer to do sets for the musical and play and build props and repair equipment for the marching band. And they said those type of activities don't raise a level of concern because the board members' involvement in terms of overseeing students and staff is minimal. And if what they call it is intermittent, non-executive volunteer activities are not inherently contradictory to the duties of a board member. So some key things to remember is always, no matter what you're doing, be cognizant of your responsibilities as a board member. Avoid volunteer activities where you would be placed in a role supervising staff members or directing students and staff members. If you're going to have a high degree of contact with students, parents, teachers, or administrators, that would raise a concern. But there's no general prohibition against volunteering for other reasons in your schools. Conflict of interest. So there are certain things that have an inherent conflict. So if you have a business or activity that is a substantial conflict with your public duties, if you're going to gain unwarranted privileges or advantage or employment for certain categories of relatives or others, like you can't make a recommendation to have your husband hired as, you know, custodian in the district or something. You cannot give benefits to an immediate relative or a business organization that you have an interest in. So like if you own part of a company that does lawn maintenance or something, then that could be a concern in terms of the district hiring that company in order to do something. You can't accept gifts, loans, favors, etc., in order to influence what your decision is going to be. You can't use knowledge that the public would not have for your own financial gain. Immediate family members, board member spouse, dependent child residing in the same household, relatives, parent, parent-in-law, step-parent, child, child-in-law, stepchild, siblings, step-siblings, half-siblings, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, grandparents, grandchildren by blood, marriage, or adoption. So it's a pretty big category. And then we have others. So that falls for a lot and could be anybody. We talk most about the impact on voting for things, but also for participating in negotiations is a big one. Voting on the contract that ultimately is reached because of the negotiations, and then participating in review and evaluation of the superintendent. And so we've provided a handy chart in terms of what your relationship is to an individual and whether that impacts your ability to participate. I won't go through every one, but for example, if you yourself are a current member of a similar union, like you're a teacher in another district who's in the NJEA, then you wouldn't be able to participate in negotiations. You would be able to vote on the contract after it's all done, unless there's some other conflict for some reason, and you would be able to participate in the superintendent issues. If you had a spouse who works in the district, you would not be able to participate in negotiations, you would not be able to vote on the contract, and you would not be able to participate in superintendent decisions. So I think you can take a look if there's ever any questions that come up, and we get questions all the time on, is this, you know, niece-in-law of my husband, someone who's considered a relative or an other, and we have to look at those. Even if there's no automatic conflict, there could be a case-by-case conflict. And so it's more likely to be a conflict if the person is an officer in the NJEA or the local education association, if the person is on their district's negotiating team, or has some other leadership role that could influence the outcome of the negotiations. We see negotiations one of the biggest places where the conflicts come up. So some pitfalls to avoid: taking unilateral action, remembering you're a team. Neglecting the stakeholders. So you frame policies and such, you're talking about all of the stakeholders, not just particular stakeholders. Asserting any authority over the district staff members. Don't refer your friends for a job. And then participating directly in the district's administration. These are the hot topics. These are the ones I consider like really the actually interesting ones. So we talk about our teachers all the time and what they do on social media, but we also talk about board members and what you're doing in social media too. So obviously, as a citizen generally, you don't give up your rights in order to be on the Board of Education. So you do, however, have to exercise those rights in accordance with the School Ethics Act. You can't take any private action that would compromise your board role and the requirements to the board, including holding confidential certain matters and making sure you're supporting and protecting school personnel in the performance of their duties. Any statements that you make, especially on public media, but really any statements, should indicate that you're making them as a private citizen, not in your role as a board member. And it has to be done in a manner that doesn't compromise the board. The best way to do that is to include a disclaimer that indicates that your statement is being made as a private citizen, not as a board member, and that you're not saying like as Board of Ed member of the Readington Township Board of Education or something. That includes social media, emails, videos, all of those kinds of things where you could get yourself in trouble in terms of making a statement. We recommend being mindful about what your social media and other digital platform use is, and that you take proper precautions related to that. There's advisory opinions about things like endorsing candidates. I mean, you certainly can still have a lawn sign or a pamphlet, you can use social media, but if you're making the statement yourself, making sure you have that disclaimer readily available, just like if you post a lawn sign, if it comes from like a candidate, you can post their lawn sign, it doesn't have to necessarily have a disclaimer, but if you create your own lawn sign, it does have to have the disclaimer, and the same really applies for social media. Any social media account that inherently indicates your position as a board member should not be used to endorse a candidate. You really should make sure it's your personal social media account that has that disclaimer that's clear and visible. It indicates that your endorsement is as an individual. So in this one, there was a complaint about a board member's Facebook posts. The Facebook post said the board president doesn't let students speak. Another Facebook post had a picture of the superintendent and said, now if we could only do something about our local terrorists that destroy dreams and burn futures. The board Facebook account, the board member's Facebook account was not public, but some of the content was accessible to the public and had about 1,200 friends on Facebook. So just because you think your account is private or isn't being shared, first of all, doesn't mean that other people don't take pictures of it and post it somewhere else. I think we've all seen that in our town's Facebook moms posts. But if it's private but still has 1,200 friends, that's still available to quite a few members of the public. And the commission held that the post violated the act to support and protect school personnel. Even though the post said it was the board member's personal opinion, it was direct, confrontational, and intimidating. They said that comparing the superintendent to a terrorist on social media, which allowed access for many, was an intentionally confrontational act. And when a sitting board member makes such a judgmental proclamation, it's likely to be credited more than a statement by an ordinary citizen. And so those Facebook posts were found to be a violation of the act. I always say to our teachers, our administrators, never post something that you wouldn't want splashed on like the front of the newspaper or have to read, sitting in a courtroom across from the person. That's kind of my general advice when I talk to parents, teachers in special ed, which is one of the most common. If you're sending an email, you're making a post, would you want to be sitting across from the parent explaining it in a court? And so I kind of guide that in terms of all of our posts. Statements made by board members in their capacity as private citizens should have a disclaimer. Key takeaway. Make sure that your posts on social media, which can be interpreted as having more value because you're a board member than a typical member of the public, are indicative of your personal account versus being as a board member, even where the account is private. Even if you think it's only going to certain people, make sure that it indicates that. And that even things that are opinions can be a basis for an ethics complaint if it's confrontational, intimidating, and doesn't support and protect the school personnel and performance of their duties. Political statements. So the statutes indicate that you're not going to surrender your independent judgment to special interest groups, partisan groups, or use the school for personal gain or for the gain of friends. And so evidence of a violation would have to include that you took action on behalf of or at the request of a special interest group or person or organization voluntarily united in opinion and who adhere to a particular political party or cause, or evidence that use the schools to acquire a benefit for the respondents or a member of their immediate family or a friend. In this one, a board member filed a complaint about another board member for distributing a flyer encouraging the individual to vote for candidates in the Democratic primary election. The board member signed the flyers, followed by the word Board of Education. The disclaimer that they were acting in their individual capacity was not on the flyer. And the failure to include that disclaimer made it representative that it was not personnel action, and obviously signing Board of Education certainly inferred that it was something that was coming from the board rather than from the individual. So it certainly is important to make sure that you're doing that. And one of the concerns was that it looked like the board member had surrendered their personal judgment for a partisan political group in that township. So make sure you remember that the board is a nonpartisan party, governing body, and that you're not going to be influenced by political ideology. Make sure you don't create the impression that you're being influenced by some political party because of what you endorse and how you make that endorsement, and always include the disclaimer that you're making a statement that is not representative of the views of the board, that you're doing it as an individual citizen, and don't sign name, comma, Remington Board of Education. Curriculum. So New Jersey Student Learning Standards are the expectations in all of the areas that our schools have to implement. Districts have to ensure, and the board has to ensure, that we include in our curriculum all the things that are designated to be required under those standards. And we have to make sure that we align those in terms of our performance as a district. So we get reviewed to make sure that we are in alignment as a school district. The board does have the ability to shape the curriculum. You ultimately adopt the curriculum that will be utilized. You can oppose the curriculum, but you ultimately have to adopt a curriculum that is consistent with the state learning standards. It can't be something that undermines, opposes, or compromises the school personnel and the performance of their duties, which is that they're going to adopt a curriculum and implement the state learning standards. If you have, for example, a case where a board member has an issue with a textbook in the curriculum, they could advocate for a modification of the curriculum using a different textbook, something like that, but you still have to cover the content that's required by the state. One of the big ones that has been over the last 2-ish years is obviously the health and physical education topics. The 8th graders have to understand differences between gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, things like that. So the administration is required to put forth a curriculum that allows for teaching that. And we have to allow parents to opt out of that curriculum if they would so like, but it's important to note it's an opt-out, not an opt-in. So every student is required to be educated in that curriculum unless their parents opt them out, and the board has to approve a curriculum that addresses that. One of the most recent cases just came out December 20th, is from Warren, where the board members voted down a curriculum for the K-8 health education. And there was an allegation that it was a violation of the School Ethics Act. What's important to note is that the board had full knowledge that they were rejecting it because they weren't in agreement with what the standards were. The respondents, the board members who were alleged to have committed the violation, filed a motion to dismiss because they said that it was, that they were still considering other curriculum proposals, but were not in agreement with that particular curriculum. And ultimately, they found that it was not a violation because this particular provision requires that you include a copy of a final decision from a court of law or an administrative agency of the state demonstrating that you failed to enforce all laws, rules, and regulations, or a court order pertaining to that. And because the complainants did not have that, it could not be found to be a violation. But if they submitted that, then they could come back and it would be a violation of the School Ethics Act. So it was not a violation because they didn't have that, but if ultimately they came back with that because a curriculum was not adopted, then it could be a violation.
What was it that they didn't have?
You have to have a final decision from a court, an administrative agency, or a court order that says that you did not adopt a curriculum in compliance with the state standards. Since they did not have that, they hadn't gotten to that piece yet, you couldn't have a School Ethics Act violation yet.
Okay.
If they got
They were
court
jumping,
order,
they were jumping.
they
to
jumped the
ethics.
gun.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but if they came back with a court order, then it would be a violation. So you can have a curriculum where there's a dispute and you ultimately say, let's look at another curriculum, adopt a different curriculum that still meets the state standards, but you can't have no curriculum that meets the state standards.
Right.
You could say, look, we're happy to cover all these topics, but we think this particular, curriculum is going too far. It's further than the state standards. We're going to adopt this curriculum instead, as long as it still meets the state standards. So it didn't mean that it wasn't a violation. Once they got a final decision, then they could do that. And the failure to adopt a compliant curriculum would constitute a violation of the act.
How could that
That's
possibly,
it.
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
how could that possibly have been a violation if they said we're open to other curriculum? I don't understand.
I think because of what they actually said at the board meeting, which was not that they were in agreement with adopting other curriculums. They were clearly putting forth that they were in disagreement with the state standard and they weren't going to adopt a curriculum consistent with that.
So what would the complainant would have to go and sue the board members in court or an agency?
It could be.
Go all through that and get some type of ruling and then come back?
Right, or Department of Ed could say that the district has not adopted a curriculum that meets the state standards.
What if that was a citation in CUSAC? Would that have been something that could have been cited as, like, if we were under CUSAC monitoring and CUSAC said you didn't meet this requirement?
I don't know that a citation in CUSAC will be sufficient to get the ethics complaint.
Okay.
If it could be considered a final decision of administrative agency. So if the Department of Ed issued a final decision that you were in violation of CUSAC, I think you could at least make an argument that that's a final decision from an administrative agency that would be sufficient.
Do you see that happening with these sex ed?
Well, so what's interesting is it's really just starting to come through. So these actions by boards not to approve curriculums are just coming through this year. So this is the first decision to come out as a result of that. And we'll have to see now where they go at the next steps. You know, we haven't seen CUSAC reports that don't have the curriculum adopted. And I would say there aren't, I haven't done a full survey on it, but I don't think there are that many boards that didn't adopt a curriculum at all, although there are some. And so it's going to be a question of, did they adopt an alternate curriculum that is sufficient, or did they not at all? And then, of course, somebody has to file the ethics complaint. So there are some districts where they haven't adopted a curriculum, or they've said we're delegating that to the parents to teach or something like that, but nobody's filed an ethics complaint. And so we don't know what the outcome of those are because nobody filed.
Was Margulies, was that the whole board or just certain members that voted?
Certain members voted it down.
So the board actually voted in something that was compliant.
Not enough members, didn't have a majority vote.
So they didn't have any,
Correct.
they voted against the.
Yeah, so it
Voted against
reverted
it,
back to
people
the
voted
prior
against.
curriculum, which was not sufficient with the state standards, because the state standards
So
adjusted.
if we're exercising independent judgment, to democratically vote for something, we could be subject to an ethics complaint.
Correct,
It's pretty-
because you have to take action to vote in accordance with enforcing the New Jersey state standards.
Okay.
And as a board member, that's one of your obligations.
Well, they should just tell us we have to vote a certain way. Instead of pretending it's a vote, because this is, I have to tell you, it's very intimidating to say, now we're gonna start saying, well, you're gonna be subject to an ethics complaint unless you vote a certain way.
Or if another curriculum is adopted. You could vote to approve an alternate curriculum that still addresses the state standards. It's that you can't not vote for any curriculum that addresses the state standards.
Okay, but I mean, they said in this case, we're open to something else.
That's what they say in the moving papers.
Well, okay.
What they voted, I think, is a little different.
The other question I had is on the opt-in, opt-out.
Mhm.
Is there something the law prohibits opt-out, or is that just somebody's interpretation of it?
No, the requirement is that you have a provision for opting out.
Okay, but what does it say that? Does it use the words opt-out in the law?
I'm not sure it specifically says opt out, but that's what it is. It's that you, as a parent, have the ability in phys ed and health class to opt out of certain instruction.
Okay, but if you had an opt-in, opt-out procedure where people want to opt out, sign the statement and opt it out.
That's what it
that
is,
Prohibited, I mean, okay. Just I'm not
but there's
understanding.
no opt-in procedure. It's just opt out.
But those words aren't used anywhere.
I have to double check if it specifically says opt out, or if it basically says parents may request to have their child not participate in certain provisions.
All right, thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hopefully you'll have me back for something more exciting.
No, actually, we hope not.
That concludes my superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. We are now open to the public, limited to action items on the agenda. Were there any comments online, Mrs. Fetterman?
No. Let me check one more time. No, there's no comments on
Okay, I'll give a couple of seconds in case anybody online wanted to add, not that there's anything on the agenda to comment on. Moving on to correspondence, we had none. And if I could get a motion to approve the minutes. Motion to adopt 1.01 to 1.02. So move Beth. Second, Carol. Any questions or comments? So Justina and Michelle, this is where you may want to abstain. Can I get a roll call, please?
Ms. Bowen,
it. Yes.
Dr. Susiel,
Yes.
Mrs. Diori,
Yes.
Mrs. Hample,
Yes.
Mrs. Menzer,
Abstain.
Mr. Peach,
Yes.
Mrs. Bogorski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ryan,
Abstain.
Mrs. Wolf,
Yes.
passes.
Thank you. Moving on, do we have any unfinished business? Not hearing any. Moving on to new business. So at this point in the year, we will reassign committee selection. So what I will do, maybe tonight, since it's still early, maybe tomorrow morning, I will send out the list of committees and a brief description of what they are. And then if everybody could email me back by Friday, hopefully, because meetings are starting next week, so we want to have the committees established by then. Let me know which ones you're interested in, maybe name 2 or so. The only one that will remain standing from last year is negotiations, because that's already begun. And did I miss anything? Well, we do our best to get everybody into the committees that they want.
Just for second, third choice, or how do you handle that one?
Yeah, if everybody all picks the same one, obviously not everybody's gonna get it. But if you give me your top 2, and your meeting preference time, it'll all be in the email. If you can't possibly meet during the day, then I'll try to accommodate people that can't meet during the day into, the evening committees, that kinds of thing. So a couple things play into it.
And everything is virtual. I'll just mention that too. So
The committees,
the
yeah.
committees, right? When it comes to committee work, it's all virtual. So if you want to, go to your office or, drop your kids off at school first or something like that, and then just go home and join, you can join from anywhere, I guess is important to note.
Any other new business?
I just wanted to say that there's a county school board association meeting on January 19th, if anyone's interested in it. It's completely virtual, so you can join from home. It's in the evening. And I'm just looking at the topic, I'm sorry. And the topic is communication tips for school districts. So it sounds interesting. They have a couple people from New Brunswick School District who will be presenting. So if you want more information, you can reach out to Dr. Hart or Jason, and they'll forward you the email.
And you'll be attending too, right?
Yeah, I'll be.
So I should have mentioned that also, that in addition to the committees, there's representatives for the different associations, one of them being the Garden State Coalition. No,
This is for the School Board Association for Hunterdon County.
Okay.
I know I do the Garden State Coalition of Schools.
Okay. All right, we are now open to the public. Anything on or off the agenda? All right, not hearing any. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move Beth.
Second, Carolyn. Roll call, please.
Ms. Betterman,
Yes.
Dr. Sosial,
Yes.
Mrs. Fiore,
Yes.
Mrs. Hample,
Yes.
Mrs. Menzo.
Yes.
Mr. Beach,
Yes.
Mrs. Bogorski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ryan,
Yes.
Mrs. Wolf.
8:06. And if everyone could sign their receipt of their code of ethics training and give that to Jason.
Just now realized there were things behind my name.
Yeah,
I was wondering where everyone's like, I'm like, I didn't get it. Really got that.
Yeah, we usually don't print stuff out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, everyone brought their stuff from home. Look at that.
What's that?
He had a question for me.
Oh.
So he emailed me.
Yes.
Before I leave, I thought I'd give you the answer.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we were efficient tonight. Before.
Get it all in at once.
Get it all in.
Just so you know, I'll come around and click laptops too, so you can see the laptop. Just make sure you sign out.
And then she's
Motion to adjourn, but it's still recording.
Yes, you can.
Can you stop recording? Please.